Welcome back to 420 Chief. Today we have a very special episode. Actually, this episode holds significant meaning to me because it's the core mission of this podcast. It's not just to tell my personal story, but also the stories of others like myself who've been positively impacted by cannabis. Through meetups and interviews, we'll explore how much cannabis has not only helped people out with physical pain, but also strengthened family relationships and resulted in personal growth. It's about showcasing how cannabis played a pivotal role in my life of overcoming alcohol addiction and shifting my mindset to a much healthier, more positive one, as well as sharing some truly amazing experiences of a lot of other people. The goal of 420 Chief is to enlighten listeners about the countless benefits of cannabis, including its numerous effects on the different types of pain and the potential uses as safer alternative to conventional medicines and alcohol. One last thing, we want to help smash the stereotypes surrounding cannabis usage by demonstrating how one can lead a fully functional, intellectually engaging life while still incorporating cannabis into their lifestyles, aka stoned and successful. So with that said, I'd like to introduce our first in-studio guest today. We have Dr. Judd and Tim McCorkle. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you today?
Oh, we're doing great. Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, doing great. Thanks for having us.
It's really, truly our pleasure. Dr. Judd is actually a medical doctor who specializes in cannabis certification. So for those who are looking to seek, their medicinal card, he's the guy to talk to. So, Doc, why don't you tell us a little bit about that? Tell us what Green Cert actually provides.
Yeah, so I'm the founder of GreenCert MD. We greencertmd.com. We do online telehealth certifications in Missouri for medical cannabis. I got into that. My previous medical career dealt a lot with chronic pain, typically in women, chronic pelvic pain issues, and what I started to notice is that we didn't have a whole lot of great options. We were doing surgeries, and those surgeries may be beneficial for 12, 24 months, but generally not terribly long. They weren't like totally corrective of their pain. And we, don't like having people on opioids. This is even still before the opioid epidemic that came up over the last several years. And what I started to encounter is that as medical recreation or medical cannabis was starting to just become a thing in Missouri, I had patients who were using cannabis and were having great results with it. I think what really helped change my aspect on it was there was a article in the Journal of JAMA, Journal American Medical Association, that pointed out a 25% reduction in opioid overdose deaths in states that had legal medical marijuana programs. And it's not that people got off of opioids and started using cannabis, it's that they never got on opioids to begin with. Because how do you end up addicted to heroin? You end up addicted to heroin because you have a chronic pain issue. You get put on oxycodone. You then go up to something else, and then next thing you know, you can't get your scripts, and you're buying stuff off the street, and there you are.
Right.
So so the idea was that cannabis was basically being demonstrated as a safer, effective alternative than opioid use for a lot of chronic pain issues.
That's amazing. That really helps a lot of people, and it's much safer, especially than opioids, certainly, and not needing. I mean, can you speak to that as far as opioids are very addicting, and cannabis as an alternative? Can you speak to that as far as the addiction?
Yeah, so we don't see cannabis addiction in the traditional sense of where you think of what is addiction? Addiction is going to be where you have a need to have a basal level of some substance in your body to be at your baseline, not have withdrawal symptoms. And you don't typically see withdrawal symptoms after people cease cannabis. You similarly, I have never seen a documented overdose death in cannabis. I don't know exactly what the amount would be, but I think it would be more than you could physically ingest within a certain amount of time to try to literally die from THC poisoning.
I have
Um,
certainly tried to test those boundaries myself and have not succeeded to date.
and so the idea is you fall asleep, like you're gonna use a whole bunch of cannabis and fall asleep. So whereas with alcohol you have withdrawal symptoms, with opioids you have withdrawal symptoms. You don't typically get that with cannabis. Now you can have some cannabis abuse disorders. You can have issues where it may still impact your social life. It may still impact your work functioning life. And in that manner, you could argue that addiction might be a problem. If you were getting fired from your job because you keep going out and lighting up on your break and you're not allowed to consume at work, like that could be construed as a problem. But it doesn't have the same uh, physiologic type effects where people can, you know, die immediately from it, like say fentanyl.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's definitely another drug that's been sweeping the nation and just going out on the streets in everything at this point. So, wow. Tim, tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Um, I am a consultant to Dr. Judd's company, Green Seed MD. Additionally, I'm the owner and founder of Titan Healthcare. We were a shop based in Fenton. We're now a little more web oriented than the brick and mortar at this point. But I have been a cannabis enthusiast, grower, and quasi-activist for 30 years or plus now. Um, I've seen the benefits firsthand. I fully concur with some of your observations firsthand. Folks first hearing the concept of switching from alcohol or opiates to cannabis says, "Oh, we're just trading one set of problems for another." But it's really not that type of a situation. It's a complete trade-off. It's a lifestyle change. We find it helping people, from the bottom up, really put their lives back together.
Absolutely. I mean, for myself, I can say in my experience alone that cannabis has certainly helped me even with my anger,
Sure.
right? So before, I won't even blame alcohol. Even if I was sober, I remember just with my kids, and going in the house, I might see a mess and I would get triggered.
Sure.
And that would cause me to yell, punishment, where now um, I don't yell. I
Mhm.
think about it. It's not that big a deal. And it actually helps me kind of calm it down.
Sure.
And my kids have certainly seen that difference. And that alone has really impacted my relationships with not just my children, but with my peers, coworkers, etc.
Of course. I played in a band most of my life, and with alcohol being so prevalent in that atmosphere, playing bars and clubs and so forth, you see, you mentioned anger. You never see two guys getting stoned and getting into a fight, but we all know that we've had a little too much courage juice and probably started some shit we shouldn't have. So yes, it's a complete uh, reversal of a lifestyle, I think, and it really does have positive benefits. I've seen it firsthand. It can really turn lives around. I've seen it all the way range from heroin addicts to alcoholics. I think when people start to abuse and fall into addiction, self medication has been the real issue the whole time. They're trying to find something to compensate for whatever it is that they're lacking. We do it with our diets and other things, so it only kind of makes sense. At least that's my kind of layman's theory.
Right. Even when I was growing up, I remember they used to have television commercials that just talked about how bad cannabis was for you. This is your
Sure.
brain. This is your brain on drugs. And I believed that for a lot of years,
Mhm.
and then I would look at people and judge people based off of that because that's the way I was raised. That's what I was told. And now having experienced it for myself and firsthand witnessed the benefits of it, not just with me, but with countless other folks that
Mhm.
we've met along the way. It's just crazy to believe that how minds have shifted and opinions and just the whole concept has changed in the last 20 years.
Sure. I'm a father of many children, and I'd much rather them have had come home to me and said, "Dad, we tried cannabis. We're not really drinking. That's not really our scene." You know, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, that would have been an outlandish concept for somebody, say, oh, you want your kids smoking weed, but you don't, because especially here in St. Louis or Missouri, at least, we have that culture of, blue collar Budweiser town, so everybody here, work hard, play hard, come home at the end of the day, and that's all normalized. But your social outcast, if you were into cannabis, and suggested that, that should be a replacement for alcohol.
We've mentioned it in multiple podcasts. When you smell alcohol on someone's breath, it's almost like, I know they've been drinking, but when you're out and about and you smell weed on somebody, it's like, I smell it somewhere.
You're that
Somebody
guy.
smoking,
Right, right.
Another thing to keep in mind is, I sit here with my son, and a lot of people think negatively of that, but I don't worry about him out drinking and driving.
Right.
He's sitting here safely with me or chilling out in his room, minding his own business. If he's out with his friends, they hang out at a house, they're not out doing the crazy things. So a lot of the things that I used to worry about, like with alcohol, I'm actually proud that he doesn't drink and he
Sure.
consumes. So I would
We're proud of
much
you too.
rather as a
That's
parent,
awesome.
right, have one over the other.
Yeah.
No, it's a great thing. It really is.
Yeah, no, and like I was saying, it's becoming that day and age where we've mentioned in podcasts, it's almost like a clique. It's kind of like you're proud to be bonded with them because everything goes out the window. Politics, you don't really matter who they voted for. It's almost
Right.
like, hey, you smoke, I smoke too, and then you're able to share that moment.
Exactly.
Got a question for you guys. What would you say are the top consumption methods that people consume cannabis?
So, I mean, I think everyone would probably stay with your tried and true smoking bud, whether in a joint or in a bong or a one hitter or pipe, something like that. What I deal with my clientele, and what I was going to say is that I tend to approach clientele a little bit differently depending on age, and I'm kind of walk us back a little bit to the previous stuff that we were talking about. For older people, I find that edibles is probably the number one consumption method. They're dealing with chronic pain issues, chronic, bowel issues, whatever, and they want to take an edible. And so we'll talk to them about microdosing, which we can touch on in a minute. We'll talk to them about using edibles typically at night to help go to sleep and sleep through the night. For people who are younger, who tend to have more of a anxiety issue or maybe a less chronic pain issue, like they've hurt their knee or something, smoking tends to be probably the better option. And, I like to go with vaping, simply so you can avoid some of the combustible effects that you encounter with a typical joint. Just because, I am a real doctor, and smoking leads to lung cancer has been ingrained into me for a long time. I know that that's tobacco, not necessarily cannabis, but most of the carcinogens are created by the combustion effects, and the byproducts therein generated. So if you're able to, get that convection, hot air overflow, like on a Pax or a Storz volcano kind of thing, you can help mitigate some of that.
Not to mention you won't smell like it as much. That's certainly having
Right.
the smokeless way to go helps with that.
Absolutely. And now I do have a question about that because we've had fans and viewers who are in their elderly age and they prefer they prefer the gummies over smoking. And now the question they're asking is, why is it that when they do smoke it, they have that anxiety and they have that kind of panic, whereas when they chew the gummies and they have the edibles, it's a much better high?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to dose-dependent effects of the medication, and when you take your gummy, it takes time to break down in the stomach. It's going to come across the liver where it gets processed into a more potent form of THC, but that is being delivered at, let's say, a progressively smaller amount to your system. So you've got a 30 or 45-minute process from taking a gummy before you start to feel any effects as it's working its way through your bloodstream. Whereas with a inhalation method, you are taking that hit, coming immediately into your lungs, crosses the blood-brain barrier through the alveoli, goes immediately to your brain. So you get within minutes an effect. And so I think that, I'll usually tell people that, like, hey, if you have social anxiety and you have a PAX device or something with dry herb in it, dry herb vaporizer, turn it on, take 2 hits, maybe 3, stop. Like, and give that a little bit of time to have an effect, before you go in somewhere, which is effectively like taking, 1 hit off of a joint or something, probably in comparison. And because anxiety specifically, cannabis has been shown to increase anxiety. So it's weird that we certify people with anxiety for cannabis when cannabis has been shown to increase anxiety. But I think that that tends to be more of a dose-dependent effect. So people who have situational social anxiety, they can mellow out, turn down the brain a little bit, stop being like overthinking, working themselves up to be super anxious through that calming effect of a couple hits of cannabis. But if you were to take a hit off of a peak, of a dab, if you were to do a dab, pull out your banger and do a dab hit,
Blast it.
and you don't know what you're doing, like, holy shit, you're gonna be like, running around, just like, so that's what I have tended to see is more of a dose effect where, one of the funny stories in the cannabis industry is that every state that legalizes marijuana sees an increase in ER visits for people who think they are ODing on cannabis, and they tend to be older people, and they show up, they think they're having a heart attack, and they think they're dying, and that's because cannabis can increase your heart rate, and so they feel that. And I'm not saying there isn't a medical risk to that. So obviously, if you've got significant heart disease, you don't want to be driving your heart rate up and risking an arrhythmia or something. But they tend to show up in the ER thinking they're dying, but they're not. And as their dose comes down, they're fine.
It's something that you just mentioned quite a bit there was dosing, and earlier you had mentioned microdosing. I'd like to touch base on that a little bit because I think that a lot of the time when people freak out, I've even heard of people having like physically they can't stop moving or even causing restless leg syndrome in some cases. I think that they're just doing it wrong. I think a lot of the times they might be overdoing it. And in my experience, the more that you do it, you do build up a bit of a tolerance, but you also build up a bit more control while you're under the influence of cannabis to where you can kind of notice, hey, okay, I'm getting a little bit of anxiety, but you know how to navigate your way through it. Because there's times where I'll take a hit of like some Blue Dream or something really harsh, and if we'll do some wax and I'll blast off. I feel like, holy shit, I can feel some anxiety coming on. And I know damn well if that would have been my first time ever doing that,
Mm-hmm.
I would be freaking out bad.
Anecdotally, I found that a course of CBD, usually orally, for a couple of weeks, eliminates a lot of that as well. That's just from my generalized experience. I've never ran a concrete study on that, but they speak of the endocannabinoid system being the center of homogeneity for the body. So bringing that into, getting that balanced out between your THC levels and what the CBD levels in your body are. I found a lot of people, it's always traditionally been linked to sativas make me a little jittery and indicas are cooler for me or what have you. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I just think that's, there's, as Doc mentions, it's the intensity of the dose. We don't know what terpenes are playing a part. It could be limonene versus something else that's really driving that sensation in you, and not necessarily, because you've done a huge dose of THC per se.
Now, with that, what you just said, the sativa giving you the jittery and indica putting you in bed. Well, we do have another question from our fans. They've been smoking for a while, and the longer that they've been smoking, they've noticed that sativa doesn't make them as jittery, and indica does make them more jittery.
Really?
Absolutely.
I found it just completely the opposite. Not to argue with obviously anybody's personal experiences. It's just in generalized terms, my experience has been that it's the sativas that generally have people a little more, and Doc may be able to attest from his patients.
Well, what I think this really highlights is that, like when I'm certifying patients, one of the things that I will tell people is that if you are in California and you get a Z-Pack, you get azithromycin, It is the exact same drug if you go to New York and you get azithromycin. It's the same dose, probably made in the same factory. It's going to have the same efficacy. It's going to work the same in your body. Cannabis is a holistic product. It is natural, and it varies not just from strain to strain. It varies from plant to plant. It could vary based on where on the plant the bud was harvested from in terms of the terpene profile and the percent of THC and whatever else. So every time we're looking at these packages and they're like, oh, this bud tested at 18%. Well, some bud from that batch tested 18%. It could be as high as 22%. It could be as low as 12%. Like it might be 18, who knows, and so these are averages, and everyone's going to have certain different experiences. Tim, being more experienced and having a significantly longer lifetime of cannabis exposure, has a higher tolerance than many of our patients who are just new to it, just starting out. And so I give him a 10 milligram gummy, and he's like, yeah, that was a regular gummy from a bag. There was nothing in that. If I give a 10 milligram gummy to a 70-year-old lady who's never taken it before, she's going to be standing in there in the mirror, like holding her eyes open, going, "Can I see my eyeballs?" And so there's dose effects, there's the terpene profile differences, and so what I would say is that it's entirely possible that there is a strain of sativa that made people more calm, and a strain of indica that made them more jittery. But there may also be a strain of indica that made them more calm, and a strain of indica that made them more jittery.
Absolutely.
And so, and there is an interesting study that I saw out there that looked at genetic differences for what we call indica and sativa, and they were like, there virtually is none. Like, so there is a question of whether we have just made up and work within this framework of indica, sativa, and how much of that really exists. And, one of the things that I am eager for and hope comes to be in one of the days is that if we can get federal decriminalization, that opens up the ability for the NIH to be able to fund studies on cannabis that can be conducted in a way that actually allows research to be conducted. Right now, to do research in medical cannabis, if I wanted to run a study at, say, WashU, even though it's legal here in the state, recreational is legal, you can buy it and you can use it. What I would have to do to run an NIH study is I would have to buy cannabis from a specific location that makes cannabis that's allowed for these studies. We'd have to bring it into the state. We would then have to have people come. They'd have to consume it in front of us while we watch them, and then they would need to leave. And then we could do whatever studies. But like, how do you conduct a study on situational anxiety or on pain or on sleep if people have to come in, physically stand here, sit in front of you and consume it because you can't legally, from the NIH perspective, federal perspective, give them drugs that are federally illegal and send them out to go do something with it, like, oh, here's this drug, go use it at night.
Now function.
Someone's going to make a study saying, look at the NIH funding illegal drug use, so they can't do that. And so, if we can get it federally decriminalized, you're going to be able to conduct more studies to get, because so much of our evidence is anecdotal, what we would call level C evidence type thing. You're not getting these double-blind, randomized controlled, placebo-driven trials to see if there is an effect or if there isn't. And so, going back to the microdosing aspect, I will also say that the industry, I feel like, the industry is what every capitalist industry is. They want to sell as much weed as they can for the highest price possible. That's just the way it is. So, you find a lot of products that are more and more geared toward people who have been in cannabis and are familiar with cannabis, and they may, have gummies that are 10 milligrams, and then they may have gummies that are 25 or 50 milligrams and stuff like that. And what I haven't seen, at least so much on the market, are products for people who need 2.5 milligrams. And this is where it does make sense. We all can think of it, but it's sometimes I still need to tell patients like, hey, you can buy a 10 milligram gummy and cut it into quarters. And then instead of taking a 10 milligram gummy at night and maybe waking up or sleeping through your alarm or something the next morning because of whatever, like, why don't we take 2.5 when you get up, 2.5 at lunch, 2.5 at dinner, 2.5 at bedtime, or maybe 5. And maybe we're doing 2 gummies throughout the day, but we're doing it in such a way that we are not getting high, so to speak, We don't, not getting the cognitive impacting effects, but we're allowing them to still have the pain relief. And the other thing that I think that the recreational market kind of misses out on is that since CBD is not a controlled substance and there's not as much money to be made in it, I don't see dispensaries really pushing any kind of CBD products. Sometimes there are gummies out there that are 1-to-1 or something, but there is that synergistic effect. And so the CBD tends to work more as an anti-inflammatory aspect. And so especially for the people who have a lot of pain, I'm like, we want to look for a 1-to-1 aspect, even if you're taking 2 different gummies or 2 different products, because you can get the cannabis will help, the THC will help maybe take your mind off of it, mellow you out, maybe make you a little sleepy, allow you to go to bed. But the CBD also helps mellow that reaction for getting high, and it also helps with the anti-inflammatory effect. And so, I'll usually try to make sure that we get people on if they're coming in specifically for pain, to try to add a CBD adjunct to that, and then to try to work on, hey, you don't have to, because none of us go out and buy a beer and split the beer up into quarters, so I think sometimes it's not intuitive to people that, oh, you can take this gummy and you don't have to take 10, you can cut it into quarters and use it that way.
Yeah. You don't have to drink the whole 6-pack,
Right.
You talked about how CBD can kind of help with inflammation. I did want to cover some strain recommendations from your perspective as a medical professional. So as you guys know, a big part of what I'm wanting to do is inform and educate folks that there's different types of strains. It's not just sativa and indica. There's so many strains, and some of these strains help with things, just multiple types of things. So from your professional, like what you have seen, what would you say are some top recommended strains for some of the most common impacts for people or effects?
Yeah. So, I find that if I have patients who are coming in, we're going to start with pain to start with. So, that's probably my number one reason to certify people is chronic pain. And I find that indicas tend to help very well with that. Gorilla Glue is my go-to. That does tend to be a 50-50 or a 70-30, depending on who's breeding it, kind of thing. So it is more of a hybrid, but I love Gorilla Glue for that effect.
Can confirm, actually, Doc. We've got some Gorilla Glue in our arsenal,
Yeah.
and it works for pain and also helps me go right to bed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And so, so that's kind of my go-to one, especially for nighttime use. I think Northern Lights is also a great one in terms of doing that as well. And then we worked to develop, basically it's a Gorilla Glue gelato mix, but it's called Midnight Zen. It's one of our Missouri craft cannabis strains that we offer, that we've had good success with people. But it's basically Gorilla Glue gelato.
So, Doc, you mentioned you guys offer that. Do you offer seeds
We do.
for your customers?
Yep.
Okay, and we'll
Oh.
be sure to get that information and put that in the link. So be sure to check out the show description to get a link to
Yeah,
get some
Link in
seeds.
the description.
Yep. And so we those are my go-to ones for that. For anxiety, I tend to use I know several people who have had good luck with Blue Dream, but that's on a slow, that's because I guess the aspect I would say is that it's not sedating, so they can use it during the day, and they can use it for, like I said, that 1 to 2 quick puffs before walking into something that gives them situational anxiety, like they've got to go to a meeting or something.
They got to have a conversation. They got to call mom that day.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need that just to have that conversation.
Yep.
Right.
I mean, and it sounds really hilarious, but I have heard of people who have had family reunions, and it's like they're your family, but no one knows how to push your buttons like your family does. And so it's like they're like, oh, I'm going to go visit my parents for the weekend, or I'm going to go visit my sister and brother-in-law, or whatever. And it's like you pull up in the driveway and you're like, flick that little guy on, and take a couple hits, and then walk into the door and be like, hey, how's everything going?
This has been every one of my family events since probably 15 years old.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I love my family,
Yep.
but yeah, the whole situational anxiety is tremendous. So,
And do you have any other recommendations for anxiety?
yeah, I would say to kind of build on what you said, we actually have about 60 different strains available on our site. A lot of different variety there, just for these types of purposes. White Widow, Sour Diesel, some of those have always been good for anxiety. The traditional kind of foundational names that we're also familiar with. Um, Blue Dream is another one that Doc mentioned. Um, I always found there's a little bit of comfort in my indica side, and so Gorilla Glue again is great. Um, Probably my favorite strain is probably either Godfather OG or Cherry Pie. Those two are just, I find it for my personal cannabis needs, they're heavy hitters, strong indicas, and they put me in a place where I'm functional, but yet, like Doc alluded to, that brain noise, all that chatter that's going on, I can go in there with the level of confidence I need, put all that aside, and go do what I have to do.
So one of the symptoms that some of our listeners experienced themselves, and we're curious if there was a recommended strain for, was actually restless leg syndrome.
Mhm.
Do you guys have any good recommendations of a strain for restless leg syndrome?
Yeah, again, I personally have restless leg syndrome. In the if you can get gummies made out of restless leg syndrome, I think that's like the or not really trifecta, but that's like the perfect thing, because you've got the terpene profile and the cannabis profile of that, with the long lasting effect of it being in a gummy.
Of what strain was that?
Of Gorilla Glue.
Okay.
Did I say that? I don't. Yeah, so yeah,
Gorilla glue for restless leg syndrome.
Yeah.
But what
Good.
what have you?
So a couple things I found topicals help a lot with the restless legs. So and you had mentioned that earlier. There's a completely different vibe to that high. It's if usually they have to have like a DMSO type agent to get it to penetrate your skin and actually into your bloodstream. That's why sometimes people put on the topicals. They're like, I didn't feel anything. If there's nothing there that penetrates the skin, then you're not going to get that medicine.
What's that DMSO?
It's a type of, there's natural forms of it, and then there's chemical variations of it. But it's in almost every commercial lotion that's out there. And Doc can give us a better explanation of it. But once, in combination, restless legs, I suffer from it too, and in my family. So there's a hereditary angle to it, I believe. But a heavy dose for myself, what I would consider heavy, of edibles, usually, strong indica again. It's not necessarily strained. Blue cheese. I've had I work with a gentleman or two that they have MS, and the cheese strains seem to really help with the tremors. And for some reason, it's noticeable to them. And so I've tried to apply that to the restless legs syndrome too.
So the indica kind of has more of that like calming effect towards it. I
At
see.
least yes. And again, I think it gets back to the point of all these are physiological experiences based on us, and what's in our diet that day, and how do we eat versus how John lives versus, all these little factors. So,
Absolutely.
but yeah, I would for myself, I find that the heavy indicas again are my go-tos for it. Giving a good rub down, um, banana never hurts. I've heard the potassium is deficiency is a potential behind that. So whether that's anecdotal or not, some of those stories have merit because, where there's smoke, there's fire. There's usually something that's
Yeah, there's
tough.
controversy everywhere
You're
about
right.
everything.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, no matter what you do, you need to focus on your self improvement, right? Your diet, exercise, sleep. It
Mhm.
doesn't matter if you're on medication or not off medication. You
Mhm.
need to focus on those things, or it can kind of throw you off.
Yep.
But I did have another question, Doc. We've talked about a lot of the benefits and a lot of the symptoms that cannabis can help as an alternative. Are there any downsides to long-term usage of taking some gummies or smoking joints for?
Yeah. So this going to approach on an age specific tier. So young people versus older people. And we could draw an age marker at probably 30. So people over 30, their risks are tolerance, first off. They'll be like, oh, I was getting great effect using 10 milligram gummies, and now I'm getting less effect. And next thing you know, they're using 20 milligram gummies and stuff like that. There's always, no matter what age you are, there's always the risk of impairment. You mentioned earlier, the idea of your son being here, safe, using cannabis, not out drinking and driving or making the decision to drive. I do think that in terms of a high disordered thinking, cannabis works differently than say alcohol does. And people tend to make, like Tim alluded to before with the fighting, people tend to make more stupid decisions on alcohol than they do perhaps on cannabis. But there have been people who have been high, who don't think they're high, who decide to drive on cannabis, on a THC high, and maybe have impaired motor vehicle skills and end up having a wreck that could hurt them or someone else. And we don't want that going on. So, so that's always something to be aware of, that if you're going to be operating heavy machinery, maybe avoid cannabis for a few hours beforehand.
Related to that, I'll just a self story about myself. I spent my whole life, I was a small guy, so I had to be mean and I had to be tough and fucking prove myself to everyone. And then I joined the military and I'm always on the lookout. Bad guys could come in at any time. And I remember when I was an alcoholic, before I would go to bed, I've got my weapons checks. I've got my what would I do scenarios going through my head. Now I can't sleep. After I quit drinking and I started with the cannabis, I realized, dude, you've been training for this for so long. Like, it never happens for one. And if it did, you would be ready. So stop worrying about it, man. Like, you don't even have to worry about this. That is the mind shift difference from a little bit of the paranoia, the anxiety from just alcohol and just PTSD to now it's like I can go to bed and I don't even think about it anymore. I've been able to let that one go. So it kind of relates directly back to what you're talking about, Doc.
And I think that going back to the younger group now, I think that what people are most concerned about, especially in the government, with the anti-cannabis people, is adverse mental health effects on young people. And there is good data out there that people with certain mental diseases, and I'm going to use schizophrenia as the main one, cannabis shouldn't be used by them. There's good data that people who have schizophrenia, who use cannabis, are more likely to come off their medication, are more likely to have a psychotic break, are more likely to be hospitalized. Now, does that mean that there aren't some people who cannabis has helped who also have schizophrenia? Possibly. I did work on one patient with their psychiatrist, me and their psychiatrist talking directly to each other to certify them for cannabis, because they were like, this person is compliant with their meds. They're already using cannabis. They are compliant and well-controlled on their meds with their current cannabis usage. What I don't want to have them do is get arrested because they don't have a medical card and they're in possession, and then they end up in jail where they come off their meds and they're in a high stress environment. Next thing you know, they have a psychotic break. Next thing you know, they're hospitalized. So like in that situation, it made sense to certify that person with schizophrenia for cannabis use. But in general, cannabis probably shouldn't be used in certain mental psychiatric disorders where you are hearing voices or having delusions. And the way I tend to phrase it,
out of here, guys.
the way I tend to phrase it is that in previous times that I have consumed cannabis, there was one situation where I was we were having a conversation in a group, and then I think I'm answering this question, and then someone else starts talking, and I'm like, how rude of them to interrupt me. And then it's at that point that I realize I'm not saying anything. I'm just talking in my head to this, this answer. And it's kind of funny to look back on now, but it's like I could see how if you already hear voices in your head, maybe that's not a good thing to have going on.
Absolutely, because I'm one of those people where I'll get too stoned that I've never done it in a conversation, but I'll be texting people. I'll be like, "Oh, I totally sent that text," and then they call me like, "Why haven't you texted me back?" And I was like, "I typed it up. What do you mean?"
Right.
Yep.
I think the incidence of schizophrenia in young males is higher too. So when you're growing up, I mean, I think there's certain applications. I've seen it work in autistic youth, where it's again coordinated between a physician and all the players involved. But anytime a mind is developing, it probably the less tainting of any kind of substance is
Yep.
probably better.
Yeah, and your brain is still basically developing until 25. We like to say 21 you're an adult, or 18 you're an adult. But realistically, so that's one of the things that I had an issue with recreational cannabis starting at 21, is that there is a 4-year range there that theoretically maybe is less awesome for them to be getting on cannabis purely for recreational purposes. And so, yes, can I think there's conflicting data out there whether cannabis causes schizophrenia. I think maybe it unmasks something that was going to present later in life anyway. So maybe you started using cannabis at 15, so you're presenting at 18 with symptoms of schizophrenia, but you would have presented at 21 anyway. I don't know. I think there's debate over that. But yes, it is. I think that if you get especially past 25, and that's why I kind of picked the number of 30. We're pretty sure that if you haven't developed schizophrenia by 30, that you're probably going to be okay, and you're much safer to be using cannabis.
Doc, is there any talk about medical insurance coverage for medical marijuana for patients?
I have not heard of any significant movement on that. I think that has to do with the mechanism by which healthcare is currently provided in our nation, where you see a doctor, you get a prescription, you go to a pharmacy, you get said drug. So even if I write you a prescription for Tylenol, you go to the pharmacy, they don't just grab a bottle of Tylenol off the shelf. They will take Tylenol. I mean, it is the same Tylenol, but they'll put it in the little pill container and slap a little label of prescription stuff that says Tylenol on it and put it in the bag and sell it to you just like a regular prescription drug. Either that, or they won't even fill it and they'll just point you to the vial out front and tell you to just go buy it, off the counter. So insurance can cover, could cover it, but dispensaries aren't really pharmacies, and there's such a wide range of products. You would have to get to a point, I think, for insurance to cover it, where I would have to say, okay, Tim, I need you to use a indica-based gummy that is 10 milligrams, and cut that into half and use, 3 halves per day, dispense number 20 gummies, 0 refills. And then that's something the insurance theoretically might cover. I think the problem is, insurance doesn't want to just give you a carte blanche to go into a dispensary and go hog wild.
Have free range like a kid in
Yeah.
a candy store.
Sounds like it would just be easier to inform people how to grow their own.
Yes. And we've been very big advocates on that because, going back to the whole aspect that cannabis in California is, Blue Dream from California and Blue Dream from Missouri and Blue Dream from New York are 3 different plants, and probably have different terpene profiles and probably are going to affect you differently depending on where the source genetics came from and whether the source genetics even are Blue Dream.
They might not even have the same parents.
There is the joke that cannabis is what you say it is. Here, this is Blue Dream, even though it's not. It's our limitless dream. But it's like you can call it whatever you want. And so it's very hard to know provenance of where it's from. So if you were to get into growing, you know exactly what the strain is, or at least you know what that genetic profile is, and you can get those same seeds and have that same effect, and you know how exactly it's going to affect you. And then you can make your edibles yourself from that, because, going back to the whole edibles, I'll tell people to go use edibles for restless legs or sleep issues at night. And sometimes people call me up and they're like, no, I was up all night and I wanted to clean and I wanted to do that. And that's a classic like sativa effect of, creative. I'm awake. It's 2 a.m. I want to vacuum the house. I can't fall asleep, can't calm down. And it's because I think a lot of the dispensaries, depending on what products they're making, they're taking a lot of trim from a lot of different places and they're extracting it, maybe a solvent extraction, and then they're making their gummies with that. And, is there a lot of terpene profile in that? I don't know. I also don't know what strain it was predominant from or what it's coming from. So, there is always a very good idea that, the OG people probably had it right in the 60s and 70s of, hey man, natural plant, man, grew it in the weed, in the dirt. It's called weed for a reason. And then you can make it from that, make your edibles direct from that. You know exactly what you're getting. Whereas sometimes with the dispensaries, you don't. Like the best I've seen is strains where they'll have gummies and they'll say it's an indica, and that's it.
Yeah, you rarely get the actual strain type off of a gummy, we've noticed. But like you'd mentioned, one thing I really like about growing your own is the consistency of the product. And we have found that, and we put in a lot of time and a lot of love into our grows, but we get a very good product, a very clean product, and we know what's in it. We know we didn't put chemicals. We know this. It's ours. We're proud of it. And it actually produces very good quality.
Well,
But we do take the time to research the genetics.
Sure.
And we do spend the premium of getting those types of seeds so that we know what we're getting. And then
absolutely, something I want to touch base on is, like you were saying, with if you went to California Blue Dream, Missouri Blue Dream, and then Virginia Blue Dream, they're all three different plants, and it's the same thing. If you go to the North Dispensary off of 21, and then you go get Blue Dream from Billy Joe that you met off of Instagram, those are two completely different plants, and something a lot of
Billy
people,
Joe's is probably better.
it might hit a little harder. I'm just saying, but
his stuff usually does hit pretty hard, Bob.
the back door weed normally does have that hit. But what I'm getting at is there's a lot of people out there that they don't know what they're getting into, and they don't actually know what they're getting in the first place.
Well, yeah, I mean, here's one of the foundational things that we can look at here is for 80 plus years, this plant was illegal. And now one of our state and specifically has probably one of the most liberal laws out there on the books with allowing us to grow like it does. Why would you not take advantage of that? Missouri was actually the last state in the country to quit producing hemp once it was banned. So there's a long history of this plant and Missourians. And we know our crops, we know how to grow, and some good old boys have been doing this for a long time, out there. And that's why I think the dispensaries still have a bit to learn because, they sacrifice, you talked about quality of genetics. That's where you can't, that's the one area in cannabis you can't scrimp. That's where you put your money. That's where you shoot your wad, so to speak, because that's your foundation. After that, anything can happen, but you can't take a crappy genetic and make it a great plant. You just can't do that.
I think it comes down to commercial grows versus boutique grows. And if you are growing for yourself, you put a lot more attention, time, and effort and knowledge into that product than, say, someone who is running a 20,000 square foot canopy space and they've got to do all of this today, to move on to get to the next thing they got to do. And so time is an issue for them. Whereas with us, you're like, oh, I spent 4 hours trimming my plants. Okay. And so I think, the boutique grow inherently tends to be better. Plus, exactly what it is. Plus, you have access to it. You're not going to a dispensary and them not having it in stock. How many times have you gone there? You buy strain X, you love it. You come back 2 weeks later. Oh, strain X is sold out. We don't have any more. Don't know when we're going to get it. May not ever get it again. Plus, you're saving money. You're paying pennies on the dollar to grow it yourself. Initial setup for lights and tents or something if you're doing an indoor grow. But after that, it is the cost savings just continues to compound every harvest.
And there's some new, not to interrupt you, Doc, but there's some new products that are coming out. There's buckets where literally you just put the seed in, you don't have to do anything else. The
Auto
soil
grow.
is there.
Yep.
Does it? You know, it's fully.
Yep.
So there's been some tremendous advancements in it, and it makes it, you know, super easy for the home grower now.
Even with our home setup, we've got it. I've almost got this fully automated, from the lights, the humidity, the watering. I still have to mix up, the plant food and stuff like that just right. But a lot of that is really automated. But it's been a really great, very, very informative and educational episode today. Is there anything else in closing, gentlemen? I'll start with you, Tim, that you would like to say to the listeners?
I'd just like to first off begin by thanking you both for having us today, and thank you especially for your service to the country. Lots of respect for that. Yeah, I encourage everybody to grow and to have a good time doing it. You know, God bless cannabis. God bless U.S.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we appreciate you guys for showing up, taking the time of the day to be here, you know?
And Tim, I'm super stoked to swap notes on some personal grows.
Sounds good.
Absolutely.
Looking forward to it.
Dr. Judd, any parting thoughts for the listeners?
Yeah, well, obviously, greenseedmd.com if you're looking to get certified here in Missouri, greenseedmd.com if you are looking for genetics, whether ours or others. We've got, like you said, 60 other strains, new stuff coming in all the time to try to build that up. I did bring you guys some of our 50-50 split limitless. This is a 50-50 hybrid. So you guys can check that out and see how that goes over time. And then yeah, I really appreciate you guys helping get the word out there. You know, veterans near and dear to our heart. My dad was a major in the Air Force. My grandfather served as a chief of the engine room and then subsequently warrant officer. Received his promotion to officer on the bridge, the USS. Oh gosh, I should know this now. USS Midway, I think, some aircraft carrier. I should know this. And he was, chief of the engine room on the USS Brooklyn during World War II, and so we have a long-standing family history with the military, and very much love to support our veterans and all the people out there who have pledged even if they didn't give it, but pledged to potentially give the ultimate sacrifice for our nation and our way of life.
Yes.
So
Thank you.
Well, we really appreciate it. Myself and on behalf of my brothers and sisters in the veteran community, thank you very much for your information. Thank you for the work that you're doing to help people out. And remember, if you have questions, you can always throw them in our comments or check out Dr. Judd at his website. Bub, again, is going to throw the link in the description, and reach out to your local cannabis doctors in your respective states. And if you don't have one, you can always go to Google to find information. But I think the big things to take away are always be safe. No matter how you're consuming, make sure you're in a place surrounded by the right people, or no people for that matter, and you can actually enjoy the medicine and let it do what it is supposed to do for you. And if that means you're cleaning the house that day, or that means that your mom's coming over later that day, make sure it's the right strain for that. Don't just have to crash out because Nana's coming by. You know what I'm saying? But as always, if you would like to see the changing world, lead with change, lead with love. Chief out.
Be the best because you are the best. We appreciate it.